This object is a comet. It looks and behaves like a comet, and all evidence points to it being a comet.
It's a window into the deep past, and so deep in the past that it predates even the formation of our Earth and our Sun.
Truth is that there are lots of anomalies, a number of problems, puzzles, mysteries that we don't understand, and that's actually what the public cares about.
During NASA's November 19th live stream on the interstellar visitor 3I Atlas, there was a strange moment where the briefing seemed to slip out of alignment. Not because of a glitch on screen, but because of something subtler. The feeling that what mattered most never quite made it into the words. If you watch the replay as background noise, you'll miss it. But if you listen closely, you can feel a second story running just beneath the official one. In this video, we're going to walk through that briefing as if it were a map. By the end, you'll know exactly where the narrative bends, where the silences start to speak, and why 3I Atlas might be far more important than the calm tone suggests. Along the way, keep an ear out for a single sentence about its origin that passed almost unnoticed on the day of the stream. It may be the quiet key to the entire encounter. When NASA announces a briefing on a visitor from beyond the solar system, there is a certain expectation. You imagine crisp imagery, clear plots, and a careful explanation of what makes this object different from the millions of local comets we already know. After all, interstellar objects are rare. Each one carries the chemistry and history of a place our probes will never reach. On November 19th, the setup sounded promising. Nearly 20 spacecraft had watched 3I Atlas from different angles across multiple wavelengths. Hubble, James Webb, Lucy, Psyche, Maven, MRO, and others were all mentioned. The stage was set for a deep dive into a traveler that doesn't belong to our system at all. But that version of the briefing never quite arrived. Instead, what unfolded felt like something more fragile, a story constructed to hold rather than to reveal. A long sequence of reassuring sentences, a careful avoidance of certain details, and above all, a repeated insistence that 3I Atlas is simply a comet. Ordinary, understandable, unthreatening. That was the surface. The interesting part lies underneath. The first pattern appears in the opening minutes. Before the panel spends any serious time on data, they spend time on denial. Not aggressive denial, just soft, persistent framing. 3I Atlas is not an engine, not a probe, not a threat. It behaves like a comet, looks like a comet, should be treated as a comet. Stated once, that would be normal. The internet invents wild theories fast, and NASA has to keep expectations anchored. But in this briefing, the reassurance is repeated, almost gently like a refrain. Each new segment seems to curve back toward the same safe conclusion. It's a comet. It's a comet. It's a comet.
We certainly haven't seen any techno signatures or anything from
There is something curious about that repetition.
Other than a comet, but
Institutions rarely dwell on scenarios that were never considered. When you hear it's not X, it's not Y, it's not Z several times in a row, you're hearing the echo of conversations that happened off camera. Conversations about what 3I Atlas could be, and what the public must never be invited to speculate about. Those internal debates never appear on the stream. Their absence is exactly what makes them visible. The second pattern is quieter. It hides in the way certain facts are introduced and then almost immediately submerged. Throughout the live stream, the panel touches on anomalies without ever really landing on them. They mention an unusually high ratio of carbon dioxide in the coma. They mention dust grains holding more nickel than iron, an inversion not common in familiar comets. They mention an unexpected polarization signal in the scattered light, hinting that the particles around 3I Atlas are shaped or aligned in ways that don't quite match our local examples. Each of these would normally be an invitation, a reason to slow down, to show plots, to compare with previous comets, to ask what kind of history could sculpt such chemistry. Instead, each detail passes through the conversation like a brief flash of light. A few words, a qualifying remark, and then the stream drifts back to safer ground. Standard comet behavior, standard solar heating, standard dust tails. And then, almost buried between two slides, comes the line that should have stopped the briefing cold. One of the scientists notes that 3I Atlas may originate from a stellar environment older than the Sun itself. In simple terms, this object may have formed in a system that was already old when our solar system was just beginning to assemble. In another kind of program, that idea would sit at the center of everything. A relic from an older star crossing our sky for a few weeks, carrying a chemical record from a time and place we will never directly visit. Here it lasts only a sentence or two before being wrapped in caution and moved aside. This asymmetry, ordinary details explored at length, extraordinary hints compressed into passing remarks, is one of the clearest fingerprints of a story that is straining at its own edges. The briefing remains technically honest, yet the weight of each fact is not the same. You can hear it in how long they linger and how quickly they move on. The third pattern is visual, or rather, almost entirely invisible. Throughout the stream, the panel lists the missions observing 3I Atlas. Hubble tracing its coma, Webb probing molecular bands, MAVEN and other spacecraft measuring hydrogen. Lucy and Psyche catching remote glimpses from their own trajectories. It is a wide net spread across the inner solar system. When you hear that list, your mind fills in the missing images. Sharp composites of the nucleus, time-lapse sequences of jets flaring and fading. Spectra with strange absorption features standing out like teeth. Yet the stream shows almost none of that. What the audience receives is a small set of distant, faint frames. A blurred haze here, a pale streak there. No stacks, no raw comparisons, no bold visualization of the most unusual data. Each absence is padded with phrases that sound responsible. Instruments were pushed to their limits. Viewing angles were less than ideal. Calibration is still in progress. Some data has not yet been fully downlinked. On their own, all of these statements are plausible. Science does take time. Haste does often create confusion. But when almost every path toward deeper understanding leads into the same fog of not ready yet, the fog itself starts to look like a choice. Especially when the raw information by NASA's own account has already been recorded across multiple platforms. If you step back from the details and look at the live stream as a single object, another structure appears. On one side, there is a rare visitor from interstellar space, coming in hot with unusual chemistry. Subtle non-gravitational forces and a possible origin older than our sun. On the other side, there is an institution that cannot afford to speculate live, cannot afford to feed conspiracy, and cannot yet fully explain what its instruments have seen. Between those two pressures, silence becomes a sort of shield. Repetition is used to close doors before they fully open. Anomalies are acknowledged just enough to be documented, then quickly smoothed into the background. Images are chosen not for how much they reveal, but for how safely they support the familiar line. 3I Atlas behaves like a comet, therefore it is a comet. The live stream never says otherwise. It doesn't have to. The tension is not in what is spoken, but in how carefully the more difficult pieces are placed just outside the frame. There is a long history of agencies choosing to move more slowly than their own data. Sometimes it is to avoid panic. Sometimes it is to avoid being wrong in public. Sometimes it is simply because their models haven't caught up with what the instruments are telling them. When a visitor from another star sweeps through the inner solar system and then back into the dark, all three reasons may apply at once. What makes the November 19th briefing unsettling is not a single shocking revelation, but the pattern that emerges when you connect its quiet points. A rare object that doesn't perfectly fit existing categories, measurements that hint at an older, stranger origin, a wealth of observations distilled into a handful of non-controversial images, and a tone of calm reassurance stretched carefully over all of it. When the stream finally ends, the official story is simple and closed. 3I Atlas is an interstellar comet. The situation is under control. More results will come later. No timeline is given, and the most unusual signals are left floating between phrases like early days and still being analyzed. To most viewers, it is just another NASA event. To anyone listening for the gaps, it feels like the outline of something not yet ready to be said aloud. That doesn't mean 3I Atlas is artificial. It doesn't mean there is a hidden discovery locked in a vault. It means something more subtle, and in many ways, more interesting. It suggests that the first robust multi-mission look at an object from a much older star system may not be sliding neatly into our existing models. And until those models adapt, the safest public story is the smallest one that will hold. As 3I Atlas drifts back out into deep space, the data it left behind will slowly be processed, calibrated, filed, and eventually published. Papers will appear. Graphs will sharpen. The words used to describe this object may shift slightly over the months and years to come. By then, the live stream will be an artifact itself, a snapshot of the moment when NASA first tried to talk about something it hadn't fully understood. What remains for now is the silence around the edges, the questions that were touched and then released, the images that exist but were not shown, the sentence about an origin older than the sun, spoken once and then left to sink beneath the flow. If you felt that tension while watching the briefing, you are not alone. This channel exists for those spaces where official stories grow thin and the gaps begin to show. In a coming episode, we will follow those gaps further, back to Oumuamua and Borisov and forward to the next interstellar object that crosses our sky, to see whether the same patterns of speech and silence are already repeating. If you want to be there when that thread tightens, subscribe so you don't lose it when the next visitor arrives. In Cosmos, we trust.